Hey guys, I'm Kary, and I help lead the creative department at Boot Church. So I'm the creative director there with a staff of about 7. And I think we have maybe like 200 servant leaders. So it's a pretty big group to help lead. And in my journey of leading, I find certain things that help me. They help me be more effective. They help me essentially be in places that I can't be. So imagine 200 servant leaders. I can't talk to all of them. So things like the project brief, which is what I'm going to talk to you guys about in a little bit, are things that really help me. And so today, the topic for my talk is how to communicate with creative teams or a creative person. And the way that I do this is through something called a project brief. And again, this helps me champion the calling of Pastors Rich and DC. Like I said, I'm the creative director at Boot Church, and so it helps me tell people about Jesus, because the more people that we can get to be a part of the vision and actually give up their time and talents, the more people we can reach. And so ultimately that's the goal. And so the first thing you want to do when you are trying to communicate to creatives is create clarity. Clarity, super important to create clarity. And there's 3 reasons why you want to create clarity. Number 1, you want to remove the barriers. So whatever's going to get in the way of you and essentially the outcome that you're looking for. You want to make it as easy as possible for the creative and the collaboration, even for yourself. You want to set both of you guys up for a win. So number 1, remove barriers. Number 2, essentially is eliminate frustration. So what happens when things don't go according to plan or things come up that you weren't anticipating? Sometimes that can be very frustrating. And I've been in that space. I'm a graphic designer, so I've had instances where I'm like 50% done, and I'm like, oh man, I'm crushing this. And then somewhere along the line, I have a presentation or I pitch a concept, and we are on different pages. And so that can be very frustrating, and something that I would, just a little tip for leaders in this call is essentially to just keep in mind that it's a little bit frustrating for a creative to have to go back into their files to fix things that could have been avoided if they knew about them beforehand. So number 1, remove barriers. Number 2, eliminate frustrations. And number 3, essentially you want to honor their time. So at VU, we work with many servant leaders. We have this phrase at VU that says that we are staff-led, but servant leader ran. And that really just means that we can't do it without them. And so I want to make sure that whenever I delegate a project, that I'm honoring their time, that I'm taking into account the effort that goes into it. And so when you prepare a project brief, essentially you're doing that. You're letting the creative know that. And I find it to be very beneficial in my ability to actually create strong relationships with the people that I work with my colleagues, with our servant leaders. And so create clarity. And essentially, how do you create clarity in the context of communicating or delegating a project to a creative? Well, the way that you do that is through a project brief. And I may use the word project brief or creative brief interchangeably. You can Google a lot of this and you'll find templates and samples. The one that I'm going to share with you right now is something that I've worked on over the years and that I find to be the most beneficial in the church context, but specifically to VU. Again, because we are sole servant leader, which by the way is the term that we use for our volunteers. We are so heavily dependent on them. And so the project brief that I'm about to share with you essentially is the best tool that I've come up with to be able to delegate projects. So it's going to be 8 steps. I encourage you to take notes if you can. I hope that if you apply this, you'll see a lot of improvement in your collaborations, and you'll find that the time and the delegation has been a lot more effective. So number 1 is an about. So the first thing you want to do when you put together a project brief is essentially explain the project. Here's a question that you should ask yourself in this section. What do I know that they don't? So essentially you want to take inventory of the information that you have, that you learned either through the process of a meeting or whatever the case may be, you want to make sure that you're communicating that to the creative as well. Some things that you want to include in this section are things like explaining the project. So for example, in the context of, let's say, VU Girl, you can say something like, well, VU Girl is the women's ministry of VU Church. It happens 3 times a year, once a season. It's led by Pastor DC. The slogan for VU Girl is a sisterhood for every season. And so information like that, depending, obviously the information would change depending on the project, but essentially the goal is to give them information. What do I know that they don't know? The second thing you want to do is essentially establish a timeline. So you want to take inventory of what it's going to take, of the process, the actual quantifiable time that's going to go into this thing. So the question you want to ask here is, what schedule do we need to be on so that I don't see something for the first time when it's too late? Personally, whenever I see something and it's too late, that puts me in a bad spot. That puts them in a bad spot, the whole department, because essentially at that point you're putting into gamble the marketing or the advertising or just the communication to your church. And so taking that into account, I always establish touch points, meeting points. So one of them is a hard deadline. So, hey, this is absolutely due this day and this time. The other thing you want to do is basically take into account the times that you're going to touch base with the creative. So, hey, the first round of revisions is due in 2 weeks. The second round of revisions is due a week after that. And so lay that out depending on the project. And the other thing you want to do in this phase is essentially take into account feedback and revisions. So again, in the context of VU Church, because we do work with servant leaders, a lot of our servant leaders, essentially, they give us what I would call leftover time, meaning they did an 8-hour workday, they did whatever they had to do, they spent time with their families, and whatever is left from that, essentially, is what they contribute to VU. And so I have to be very mindful of that. And so sometimes revision for somebody can take a week. Sometimes it can take 2. And so just taking those things into account and actually laying them out into your project brief. The third thing that you need to include in this project brief is essentially what's called deliverables. All that means is, I couldn't even pronounce it. All that means is essentially everything that you should have, all the files that you should have at the end of the project. The question you should ask in this phase of the project brief is, what needs to be turned in and how do I need it? So what needs to be turned in and how do I need it? So what do you need? Do you need let's say three things. You need an IG feed, you need an IG story, and you need a Facebook banner. Well, indicate those 3 things. Hey, your deliverables are 1, 2, 3. And also include the specs. So whatever the spec for the feed post is, whatever the specs for the Facebook banner are. Does it need to be a specific resolution? Do you need the file export in a specific way? So is it a JPEG or a TIFF? All of these things matter depending on what you're working on. And so you want to set up the creative for a win. So number 3, include the deliverables. The 4th thing you want to include is the assets. So the question you want to ask here is, what does the creative need to succeed? Meaning, in the context of the church world, a lot of times we're working with sub-brands or ministries or whatever the case may be. So in the context of the VU Girl example, well, what does the creative need in that instance? They're going to need the VU Girl logo. They may need the fonts that we use for that brand, a style guide or a brand guide. They may need access to a library of photos or stock photography, whatever the case may be. You want to provide them with that. The most frustrating thing as a creative, because I've been there myself, is having to dig for things that should have been provided to you. So you never want your creative to have to be going through a server or a Google Drive or whatever the case may be. You want to set them up for a win. The 5th thing that you want to include essentially is creative direction. So in the case of VU Girl, if I were to assign this to somebody, I would give them a creative direction. So that means basically a standard of visuals. You wanna provide a lane for them. You wanna tell them, hey, stick to this lane. So the question you wanna ask in this part is, what visual direction is best for this? And what tone is best for this? So you wanna consider those things. You wanna put a mood board together, and you wanna provide that to the creative so they understand what they're aiming for. References can be things like an idea. So you read something in an article, you got an idea from it, that's an idea reference. It can be a style. So, hey, I want a Swiss type of design. So that means very uniformed, very linear, very structured. And so providing this feedback to the creative is very helpful. Number 6 is copy. So again, in the context of a church world, so let's say we need to make a VuGrow invite. There needs to be a blurb, like a paragraph explaining the event. So make sure that you provide this information, date, time, call to action, whatever the case may be. That way, whenever they're making the product or the graphic, whatever the case may be, they have everything and you're getting final files from them. And then special notes. This is something that I include depending on the context of the project. So the question that you want to ask yourself here is there anything else that the creative should know? So things like maybe how to name a file. So for example, in the context of Vu, I use this naming format. I say VC, which means Vu Church, and then the year. So VC20 VuGrow, that's the brand, dash whatever the project is. So let's say IG feed. So I would include that. I would let them know, hey, please name your file this way. Something else, hey, can you please give me these files in a zip format? Because I don't want to have to download everything. You ask for 3 deliverables. So instead of downloading 3 different things, just ask for a zip. Let's say that's your special note. Maybe it's something like copyright information. Whatever the case may be, include that, because again, it'll set them up for a win. And the last thing you want to do is say thank you. You won't find this if you Google project brief. You won't find thank you in the projects. But again, I work with servant leaders, people that give time, talents, or treasure to Vu, and I want them to know that I value them, that I value their time, their commitment, and so I say thank you. And so I'll include that in the project brief. Hey, thanks so much for doing this. If you have any questions, let me know. And so that is the project brief that I put together. It's 8 steps, and I find it to be very helpful in my journey of communicating with creatives. I heard this quote the other day, and it says, you're only as good as your team. And so I just want to encourage you guys that the more that you take time to improve your communication, essentially the more that you value others, the better that you're going to get. And so as leaders, me as a creative director, I'm only as good as the team, as the collective unit of all of us put together. And so I encourage you guys to apply this and to do a project brief from start Monday. Do the project brief and apply it, and I can guarantee you that you're going to see better collaboration in your teams. And often I get asked many questions. Many people DM me or they email me or through my website. And I'm available. I want to be a resource to you. So I've actually put these notes together and some other extras like sample project briefs and things like that. And so if you go to Kary or Kary, I translate my name. So Kary.design. And you put your email in there, I will send you these resources. And thank you so much for leaning in, for listening, and for giving this time to be together. And Nick, again, thank you so much for having me be a part of your conference. It's been a privilege, and love you guys a whole lot. Have the best day.